Welcome to this deep dive. We are tackling a fun one, Pixar's Monsters, Inc. You know, when I was looking through all the stuff you sent over about this movie, I was really struck by, like, how much there is to say about it. Like, it's more than just a kid's movie, right?
Well, for sure. Yeah, Monsters, Inc. It's one of those films that works on so many different levels. You've got that classic Pixar humor and heart, but it also, dives into some surprisingly complex themes when you really start to think about it.
It really does.
True.
Okay, so, like, right off the bat, the premise itself is so clever. What if those monsters in our closets, those ones we were all afraid of as kids, what if they weren't, like, actually there to scare us? What if they were just, like, clocking into work?
Right. That's such a brilliant way to flip the script. That whole universal childhood fear, the monster under the bed, and then they just totally flip it on its head. And suddenly, it's like, wait a minute, the monsters are the ones who are terrified of us, of children. I love that. It's so good. And they don't just play with that fear, they create this whole world around it. Monstropolis.
Which, when I was reading your notes on the design of it, I was really struck by, like, the way they use scale and perspective in that city
hmm
to make it whimsical, but also kind of, like, unnerving at the same time.
Absolutely. Like those huge, huge buildings designed for monsters, doors towering over everything. I mean, it really does make you feel like you're not in Kansas anymore. And it's all in the details, too, like even down to the way they animated Sully's fur.
Oh my gosh, the fur. I
Yeah.
read somewhere that they animated something like 2 million individual hairs on that guy.
It's crazy, right? And I mean, this was groundbreaking for its time. Each hair had its own physics, which sounds ridiculous, but it just makes him so much more expressive. You feel every emotion through his fur, through his movements. And, it just goes to show they didn't just want to create a believable monster. They wanted to create a believable character.
That's such a good point. It really makes you appreciate the art of animation, doesn't it? It's not just about the technology, it's about how you use it to tell the story. And speaking of story, I mean, we have to talk about our two favorite monsters, Sully and Mike.
The ultimate dynamic duo, right?
Right. What I loved, and I didn't really think about it until reading your analysis, is how perfectly these two complement each other. You have Sully, who's this big, lovable guy, kind of a softie at heart. And then you've got Mike, who is like the ultimate hype man. Always
Wow.
energetic, always cracking jokes.
Total classic pairing.
Mhm.
And they balance each other out so well. But I think what really makes their friendship work and what makes it so heartwarming is that underneath all the bickering and teasing, they're fiercely loyal to each other. They would do anything for one another.
They really are the best kind of friends. And you really see that tested when this little human, Boo, shows up, right? Speaking of Boo, one of the sources mentioned that even though she doesn't have a ton of dialogue, she's crucial to the entire plot. What do you think about that?
I think that's so true and so interesting because Boo really is the embodiment of innocence, right?
Hmm.
You have this tiny human who wanders into a world where she's seen as a terrifying monster. And because of that, she challenges all of the monster's preconceived notions about humans. Like everything they thought they knew is thrown out the window.
And it's Sully who really has to confront those preconceived notions, right?
Yeah.
Like, especially at the beginning, he is terrified of her.
Oh, totally. And you know what's so great about that? It's that fear that actually drives the whole plot forward. Remember, Monstropolis runs on the screams of human children. Like, that's their energy source. They have a whole energy crisis going on, and it's all fueled by fear.
Right. And one of the sources pointed out how that whole energy crisis thing is actually a really powerful metaphor. It's like, even in our own world, think about how often fear and manipulation are used to, like, control people or maintain the status quo. Totally.
Yeah.
And you see that happening in Monstropolis too, right? Like, think about all the stuff the monsters are told about human children, how dangerous they are, how even a touch can be deadly. It's basically propaganda designed to keep everyone in line.
Which, sadly, feels even more relevant today than it did back then. But then there's this other side to the story, which is that hopeful message about laughter being a more powerful, more sustainable energy source.
Oh, I love that part. It makes you wonder what we're using to power our own lives, and our societies. Is it fear and division, or is it connection, empathy, maybe even a little laughter?
Right. It's about questioning what we've been taught to believe. Like,
Mm.
are we really using the best fuel sources?
Mm.
And that's a powerful message, especially for younger viewers.
Absolutely. It encourages critical thinking, like don't just blindly accept what you're told, question things, explore, figure things out for yourself. And that idea that laughter can be more powerful than fear, man, that's a message we could all use a little more of, right?
Totally agree. No, we can't talk about Monsters, Inc. Without talking about Sully and Boo's relationship, right? That's the heart of the movie.
Oh, 100%. The way those two connect, it just transcends language, species. I mean, you have this big, intimidating monster who's scared of this tiny human, but he gets over his fear and he sees her, like he sees her.
Right. It's such a great example of how our perceptions can change when we open ourselves up to something different. Plus, the scenes together are just so funny and heartwarming. Do you have a favorite Sully and Boo moment?
Oh man, that's a tough one. There are so many good ones. But I think the scene where Sully makes Boo laugh for the first time, like really, really laugh, oh, that gets me every time. That pure joy, it just shows how powerful laughter can be. It breaks down barriers,
Yeah.
it builds bridges, even between a monster and a human.
And the animators do such a good job of showing that connection growing between them, like not just through what they say, but through these really subtle gestures.
Yes. We talked about Sully's fur earlier, but even just the way he looks at her, you can literally see that fear melting away and this incredible affection growing in its place. It's small, but it's so powerful.
It really is. And that takes us to the ending of the film. And, okay, no spoilers, but how does Monsters, Inc. leave you feeling?
Oh man, I'm a sucker for a happy ending, but this one always gets me right in the feels. Like it is bittersweet, you feel that sense of loss knowing Sully and Boo can't be together in the same way anymore. But at the same time, you see how much they both grew and how they changed their world for the better. They faced their fears, they found a new way to power their society, and they proved that connection really is possible even between those who seem like they're, worlds apart. Oh. And that final shot with Sully looking at the door.
Don't even get me started on the door. I'm already tearing up just thinking about it.
Right. It just leaves you with this little glimmer of hope, doesn't it? Maybe, just maybe, they'll find their way back to each other someday.
I know. It's such a powerful ending. And it's amazing how a children's movie can be so funny, so heartwarming, and also kind of heartbreaking all at the same time, I mean, it's got laughs, it's got tears, it's got those life lessons we were talking about earlier.
It really does. And, speaking of those life lessons, one of the sources I read talked about how Monsters, Inc. actually sparked all these interesting conversations, even outside of the film itself. People were debating about fear and energy, even corporate responsibility. It really got people thinking.
Well, yeah, it's not every day a movie makes you question where your electricity comes from. But it makes you look at the world a little differently, doesn't it? It's almost like the film is holding up a mirror and saying, what do you see?
Yes. And even more importantly, what are you going to do about it? It's a call to action. Be curious, ask questions, challenge those assumptions, and try to make the world, just a little bit more compassionate, a little bit more, laughter-filled.
I love that.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Monsters, Inc., what's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I think it's that even when things seem scary or uncertain, there's always hope. Connection and laughter are powerful, powerful forces. And sometimes the things that scare us the most, well, they might not be so scary after all.
That's beautiful. And I think we could all use a little bit more of Sulley and Mike's optimism in our lives, and maybe a little bit of Boo's fearlessness too, right?
100%.
So next time you hear a bump in the night, just remember, it might just be a friendly monster looking for a good laugh.